The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to West Northamptonshire. We haven't been here for a couple of years. Well, it's about time we'd righted that wrong, isn't it? So this week we're going to be seeing 5 lovely villages which are all kind of around a big reservoir called Pitsford Water, and on Friday you'll actually see that reservoir. We've got to make our way to it though, and to do so we need to travel through these lovely Northants places. Starting with one that's got a bit of a history with building materials, ironstone and bricks mainly. This is Scaldwell. Scaldwell, Shallow Spring. This week we make a return to West Northamptonshire and we're exploring some of the border regions here where West and North meet each other. This is Scaldwell, which sits in gently rolling countryside about 8 miles from Northampton one way and 8 miles from Kettering the other. The name Scaldwell comes from Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon. Scald is taken to mean shallow and wale or well is a spring or a stream. It's a name that fits a place shaped by water, and this area had plenty of that. Long before written records, people here were active. Archaeological finds have before now included Roman pottery kilns and a hoard of 6th century loom weights. The land around here was all open fields and pasture that supported mixed agriculture on clay and marl soils. Scaldwell's entry in the Domesday Book tells us it was a sizable settlement in the Maudsley Hundred, with around 42 households. Land was divided between 3 major interests: Bishop Geoffrey of Coutances, the Abbey of Bury St Edmunds, and Countess Judith. Over time, those Domesday holdings developed into distinct manors. The Countess Judith estate here, held by Hugh, formed one strand. The Bury St Edmunds and episcopal lands formed others. Later centuries saw these estates pass through gentry families, as was the norm. Today, the Church of St Peter and St Paul, standing tall at the northwestern end of the village, is the best feature of Scaldwell. It has a sturdy Norman tower dating from the 12th century, with much of the main fabric carefully restored in Victorian times. Elsewhere, there's a green with a well, first dated 1685 and rebuilt in 1874 under an Elizabethan bequest. Nearby sits a former school, a congregational chapel of 1868, a modern war memorial, and further afield is the Scaldwell Lodge and an old quarry and the location of an old windmill. Most residents over the centuries have been farmers, labourers, quarrymen and railwaymen, especially during the ironstone years when narrow gauge locomotives and an aerial ropeway crossed Scaldwell's fields. As such, local stories are a little bereft of anything. That said, villagers do speak of the well as a place that never truly failed, even in dry summers. Faint wagon sounds are still imagined on still evenings where the ironstone tramway once ran, and some old tales mention a restless presence near the old windmill. And so, Scaldwell's main selling point should be its location. It certainly has got a good one. Walking its lanes today, you're passing through a village that's seen everything from Roman finds to 20th century quarrying. Let's have a look. So, as we learned in the intro there, Scaldwell had lots of quarrymen once upon a time. The Staveley Coal and Iron Company operated a number of ironstone quarries around the villages of Brixworth, Hannington and Scaldwell from 1912 until 1963. The first pits lay to the east of the Scaldwell to Brixworth Road and began producing ore in April 1913. 2 separate 3-foot gauge tramways transported ore from the quarries, one serving the Hannington pits. The second, longer tramway ran from pits east of Scaldwell to a depot north of the village. An aerial ropeway connected the 2 tramways to sidings on the Market Harbour to Northampton railway line. The pits were originally hand-worked, but in 1933 steam dragline excavators were introduced. In 1914, new pits were opened near Grange Farm, a mile south of Scaldwell, and the Scaldwell Tramway was extended to serve them. New ore fields were leased south of Brixworth in 1939, and the tramway was further extended to reach those too. During the Second World War, a new standard gauge branch line was laid to the Hanging Houghton quarries. That branch was extended to Scaldwell in 1954, and the aerial roadway was abandoned. Ore was tipped from narrow to standard gauge wagons at Scaldwell. The final ironstone pits in use were a mile and a half southeast of Scaldwell at New Grange Farm. They ceased working in 1962, and the entire system was then abandoned. The tramways were removed by 1964, and the remaining pits were landscaped and returned to agricultural use. And you can sort of tell, can't you, that Scaldwell has that ironstone history, because on that walk up from the old brickworks, which we'll see at the end of this video, there are loads of ironstone buildings, and there's more to come. That's a spoiler alert. So we're almost in the centre of Scaldwell now. There's a bend here, and if you go around that bend, you're heading towards the church, which the bells have just chimed actually for 7 o'clock this morning. Let's have a look and see what life's like in the churchyard. So, after a short wander down the road from our parking spot, we've arrived at landmark number 1, St Peter and St Paul's Church. This is early Norman in origin, and the first stage of its tower still carries that early work. Building work during the 13th century shaped the main body of the church, while the 14th century porch on the south side added a strong entrance point later. Inside, the medieval nave arcades and stonework remain in place. The church gained Grade II listed status in 1954, bestowed upon it because of the value in its medieval fabric, but it was also given to it thanks to an extensive 19th century restoration that helped secure its structure. St Peter and St Paul's forms part of the Walgrave group of parishes and is open each day for prayer and visits. Regular services take place here too, and study groups meet each week. Its upkeep is supported through local fundraising for the most part, which clearly does a very good job. So just up from the church you can see the village green, which is in 2 or 3 different parts actually. There's roads that cross it in kind of all directions. If you look carefully you can see there's like a brick structure which is on this particular part of the green here. That's a pump / old well. We'll see that towards the end of the video as we make our way back down to the old brickworks. Our next job is to go this way, and you can see there's a right turn. We're heading for something called Stabilised Pavements, which is a local business. It's quite a walk away though. Scaldwell might be a small village, but even so it still has a business to its name. This is Stabilised Pavements, a company which began in 1996 and set its base in Scaldwell soon after. The clue to what these guys do is in their name. Their early work centred on soil treatment for local road firms, using methods that strengthened weak ground without large imports of stone. Later, it developed deeper ground stabilisation techniques that relied on lime and cement-based binders to improve base layers of rural roads. The process uses large mixers that blend the binder into the ground, creating a stronger layer that can support later surfacing. Current work includes farm track upgrades and road-based treatment across the region. The firm is well known across many parts of rural Northamptonshire, and their office at Ironstone House remains the centre of their operations. The company is also registered as an upper-tier waste carrier, with its most recent renewal in 2023. And it's probably down to those guys, in some small regard, that Northamptonshire's roads are actually really, really good. Every time I've been to Northants, I've had no issues with the roads. They're smooth as silk with very few potholes. I'm pretty sure there are going to be people watching this video thinking, well, there's potholes where I live in Northants. Well, that's as may be, but I haven't come across those yet. So, yeah, up to now, it's been quite nice travelling around Northants. Okay, next job is to go down this road here and go around the bend. You can see in the distance there's a pub just there, or what used to be a pub. It's not now. On the next corner, there's an old pub. This was the Red Lion, which first appears in records in 1701, when a lease placed it on the village green with barns, stables and an orchard. The present structure isn't the original Red Lion, therefore, because here we're not on the green. This building dates from the 19th century, and by 1886 it was recorded in a survey under the same name as the older pub. During that era, Mary Buswell served as victualler, followed later by James Buswell, and by the early 1900s the pub was run by Judd Williams. The building began as a two-storey house with a central corridor and 3 rooms on the ground floor. The upper floor held 3 or 4 rooms depending on how the front rooms were divided. Over time, the bar moved from the back to the northern wall. Later work opened the lounge and restaurant into one space. Mid-20th century changes and later extensions altered the interior, but kept the outline seen on old maps. The pub is now a private house again, but it still remains a point of interest on village walks. Interestingly, there's a date stone which is on the end of this gable here. Can you see it just there? That says 1675, but there's absolutely no way that building is from the 17th century. You can just tell by looking at it. I've got 6 years of experience now, and I can tell you for free that that is certainly not something that was built in 1675. That is far newer. I imagine that stone has been reset at some point. Now we're at an old chapel on East End. This was built in 1884 and was linked to the Brixworth Methodist Circuit. It appears on the same 1886 survey as the Red Lion, serving as a small place of worship, a role it continued in until well into the early 1900s. It's primarily made of brick and has a simple front with a central doorway and 2 tall windows on each side. The slate roof was added during later work. Inside, wooden pews once filled the main room, with a small vestry placed at the rear. Old maps show that the footprint has changed very little from its earliest times to now, but of course worship has now ended. It did so in the mid-20th century, and for a short time it was used as a makeshift village hall for small events. It was later sold privately and converted into a house. The recreation ground in Scaldwell has been here since 1928, when a piece of land was purposely set aside for sport. A pitch was laid out soon afterwards, and early teams played with simple timber posts. The ground sits just off East End down a small path. A small shelter once stood near the entrance, and when it opened, trees were planted along the boundary. Later years brought metal goal frames and summer cricket sessions, which made the field useful throughout the year. During the late 20th century, a play area was added and new swings arrived in the early 2000s. Today, the grass is kept short through regular mowing and the field is used each week for football training. It also hosts summer events and small meets. Just before we leave East End behind, I just want to show you this house. The one on the end has a sign that says to Chorley 3 miles. Have I suddenly been transported to Lancashire? Because Chorley is miles away from here. Now we've reached the village hall, which, as you can tell, hasn't always been a communal venue. This began life in 1846 as a school, built with local support and placed on the eastern side of the village. It appears on that very same 1886 survey. It was enlarged during the late 19th century to meet rising numbers. Set in ironstone with a slate roof, what is now the main hall served as the teaching room. A rear room held the infants class. Tall windows line the southern side, and a small porch marks the entrance. The school closed in 1963, after which the building passed to parish trustees. It soon became the village hall, with the interior adapted accordingly. A kitchen was added during later work, and the layout was adjusted to suit a wider range of uses. Today it hosts parish meetings each month and is used for classes and small groups. Bookings are handled through the same parish team that manage the playing field. It's good to see an old building remain a well-used part of village life, even if its life as a school is now over. On the village green we have a pump. This dates from the late 1800s, and guess what? It appears on the 1886 survey. It served the houses around the green long before the current pipe supply reached the village. For years, it was used each day for water collection. The pump itself is cast iron. A tall handle rises on the right-hand side, and the spout has a simple curve that once fed a small trough placed beside it. When mains water arrived, the pump was kept in place rather than removed. The trough went during later works, but the pump itself stayed as a fixed point on the green. Its paint has been renewed several times and the metal is checked for cracks each year. The parish group continues to maintain it, keeping one of the village's oldest features in good order. And as far as the well goes, remember in the intro I said it's one of those that never dries up. It kind of reminds me of that Smith song. You know the one, "There is a light that will never go out"? This is like the well that will never dry up. It's the same principle. Now, I'm in the bus shelter here in front of the green and I found a huge parish notice board. You know what that means by now, West Northants folks, don't you? There we go. Card goes on the board. And this is my view out of the bus shelter. This is what you can see. Big tree and some lovely houses going up the main street. We're now going to head back towards the start, down towards the brickworks, and I'll show you what else Scaldwell has between here and there. It's not much, but hey, it's all part of the village. On the road out of Scaldwell to the north, there's an old brickworks. This was active by the early 1800s and first appears on maps in 1834. Clay was dug from the southern side of the site, and by the mid-19th century a kiln had been built to fire bricks for local farms and new houses. The large clay pit was its main feature. The kiln had thick ironstone walls and a tall stack that could be seen from the fields around it. Drying sheds lined the edge of the pit and a short track linked the pit to the kiln. Those features appear on several OS maps from the late 1800s. Output began to fall during the 1920s and the brickworks closed in the mid-20th century. Parts of the kiln were then removed soon afterwards and the clay pit was gradually filled. Today, the ground is used for farm access. Those small earth banks still mark the site of the old pit. Scaldwell is a village shaped by the buildings and the work that once filled it. The old school, the chapel on East End, the Red Lion, the brickworks and the early sports field all grew at different times, yet each left marks that still guide how we understand this place today. Across the village, the buildings that remain tell a bunch of tales, but there is one tale we haven't yet covered. Long ago there was an old windmill, now gone from the ridge on which it once sat. Nonetheless, that building still sits in some people's minds. That's down to an unexplained ghostly presence said to drift near the old mill site. Whilst nobody knows what it is or if it even exists, it does add a strange element to this rural Northants corner. Today's ending then is a song that's a bit spooky, based around that mill ghost. See you tomorrow.
Where the old mill stands on the ridge so high, a restless spirit drifts under the sky. It circles the fields where Roman shards lie. By Judith's line and the abbey's fold, by lands the bishop kept in his hold, and back toward the mill with a lingering sigh. Scaldwell calls across the fields, paths where the quarrymen once hauled ore. green near the well's old wall, and the mill goes drifting evermore. They say it walks where the ploughlands lay, tracing the marks of doomsday through manors once held by nobles of old. Past the green and the well built in years gone by, past the chapel stones where rooks still fly, till dust brings the mill ghost back in the cold. Scaldwell calls across the fields, paths where the quarrymen once hauled ore. Steps on the green near the well's old wall, and the mill goes drifting evermore. I walk these slopes when the sail still turned, I watched the tramway engines burn. I kept my place when the quarry roared. I drift by the well where the water poured. I guard the ridge where the mill once stood, and I wander the fields as I always would. Scaldwell calls across the fields, paths where the quarrymen once hauled ore. Steps on the green near the well's old wall, and the mill goes drifting evermore, and the mill goes drifting evermore, evermore, evermore. Steps on the green near the well's old wall, and the mill goes drifting evermore, evermore.
Hello folks, welcome back to West Northamptonshire once again. Now, today I've brought you to a village which has a very interesting name. It's only 3 letters, but it used to be a little bit longer in times past. In the Domesday Book, this was listed as Wolder or Wolder. Well, these days it's been shortened and we call it Old. Old High Forest. Today on TVI, it's time to see a place called Old, a small village sitting on gentle ground north of Northampton and close to the larger village of Walgrave. It's a quiet village of a few hundred residents with fields, old stone houses and a medieval church. The name Old has not always been so simple. Earlier records use wold instead, from an Old English term meaning high forest. It refers to the tree cover this slightly raised ground once had, and it's got nothing to do with the age of the place. That said, Old is classed as ancient, with roots deep in the early medieval period. The pattern of its lanes, long plots and surrounding ridge and furrow earthworks would suggest some steady farming practices here over many centuries, even before written records became detailed. In the Domesday Book, Old appears as Walder within the hundred of Morsley. It was modest and agricultural, much like many other villages in this area. No priest is mentioned, which may mean there was then no church, or at least no resident clergy. Later medieval history centres on the manor. Over time, estates here passed through various hands, typical of rural Northamptonshire, with local gentry and clergy holding land and rights. A notable benefactor was the 17th century rector John Townson. The defining landmark of Old is St Andrew's Church, a Grade 1 listed building standing slightly apart on Church Lane. Mostly 13th and 14th century in date, it has a west tower, a clerestoried nave and a chancel, all built of local stone. Old otherwise has a cluster of listed houses and farmsteads. Manor House, Wold Farmhouse and Old Lodge all speak of a past prosperity, whilst the Old Rectory and Brewery House have ties to clerical life and small-scale industry. Several interesting people are linked with Old. The 17th century diarist Robert Woodford was born here in 1606. Later came the sportsman Lancelot Driffield, the son of a local vicar. Inside St Andrews, monuments recall the rector Alexander Ibbs. Written folklore for Old is sparse. Local history is focused more on real events and everyday rural life, such as the sale of land from the Townson bequest in the 20th century, and so on. Modern anecdotes about cricket, farming and church life are told here, rather than older legends. So Old stands today as a small Northamptonshire village with a Domesday entry, a long-serving manor, a fine medieval church and a ring of listed houses. It's all about farming, local clergy and a couple of old residents. It's not old, it's ancient. Before we go off walking around Old, we have an industrial area to cover on the eastern fringes. This is Wold Farm Park, which has plenty of businesses, but there's one that stood out to me on the map. That would be the Ice Bath Company. It was the name more than anything. They began in May 2025. Their early work centred on sports goods, with the first units built for trial use as the firm shaped its range. As the firm grew, it put effort into strong steel frames and auto-cooling baths that keep water cold without ice. They went on to make saunas for indoor rooms or gardens, and the baths gained long use cycles thanks to filters that kept water fresh for months. The mix of cold and heat work set the tone for the site, and later new oxygen chamber units added more depth to their range. First up in the actual village we have St Andrew's Church. Now, Old has no record of a church in the Domesday Book, which is interesting. There was also no mention of a priest either, so we can deduce from that a religious presence developed after the Norman conquest. The church is built of lias stone with ashlar dressings, and the nave follows a 4-bay plan. The first stonework dates from the early 1200s, with the tower added in the later years of that century. The aisle was widened in the early 14th century, and the chancel arch was built in the 15th century. The south aisle still has its late 13th century windows, while the north porch has a pointed arch entry. The tower stands in 4 stages, and the bell openings use tall stone tracery that suits the height of the upper stage. St Andrews is Grade 1 listed and forms part of the Walgrave group. It holds worship each month and hosts events throughout the year. It's usually open and visitors can come in for prayer. Next to the church there's an old school. This began in 1642, funded by Jane Leeson, who set out a free school for the village. A carved panel and date stone mark the early aim of the place, and the building kept its role for a long span. In 1868 a new wing was added, giving more room and a larger front window. Otherwise, the old school is made from limestone with ironstone bands, and the front has 3 windows set in a 2-storey plan. The central mullion window has a hood mould, whilst the right wing holds a large 5-light window. Those are elements that make this well worthy of its Grade 2 listing. For a while it was used as the parish hall, but Old has a village hall these days. We'll see that in a bit. So if you're on the lane where the old school and the church are, you'll also see this structure, which is in the grounds now of the local pub, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's a big brick tower. It looks like it's something out of, well, industrial Lancashire, really, isn't it? I wonder what it used to be. I'm thinking maybe some part of a brickworks or something like that, maybe. Not totally sure. But yeah, it's certainly a distinctive feature of old, this. Old has one pub, and this is it. Welcome to the White Horse, which has been here since the 1800s, when it served primarily farm workers. By the early 1900s it was known as a free house, and its food trade grew through the later years of that era. A major refurb in the early 2000s reshaped the inside, and a garden deck was added at some point after 2010. Otherwise, the building has a stone front and a tall roof. Inside, old parts sit beside newer work, and the bar serves cask ale and craft beer. It remains a free house with a broad drink range and holds music nights and small events. The pub is noted as a top spot in Old, drawing people not just from this village, but from other nearby ones too, like Scaldwell, which no longer has a pub of its own, of course. Just been talking to one of the locals. Apparently that big tall chimney you saw there, that used to be part of some sort of kiln, and now apparently the pub cooked pizzas in it. How about that for repurposing things? Now we come to an old independent chapel. This was active by the early 1700s, with the first written records beginning in 1729. The plan was simple: a single main room and a front that faced the road. Records continue until 1837, after which the chapel's role slowly started to reduce. By the late 19th century, the chapel had closed, and the building later moved into other uses. There was a small yard beside it, which was used for burials. It holds 22 memorial stones today, but it's the only reminder now of what this once was. The building itself is now used by a haulage firm, and a large yard stands beside the firm's reception. Records from the chapel are kept online for research, whilst the burial ground is noted on heritage walk routes and open map tools. We've made our way to the recreation ground now, where the village hall flanks one edge. The first village hall in Old was built in the late 1940s and served clubs and groups for decades. By the early 2000s, it was worn out and plans for a new hall began. A 10-year campaign followed, with steady work to raise funds and agree a site. The old hall closed shortly before the new build, and in December 2010, the new hall finally opened its doors. Inside here, the main room can seat up to 120 people, and sports rooms sit beside it. A stage and sound gear support films and theatre. Monthly films run through the year, and theatre groups use the stage. The hall can be hired for sports, dances, weddings and parties. There's a kitchen too for smaller gatherings. And this is some playing field, folks. It reminds me a lot of home, this does. Absolutely gorgeous. And that cricket pitch is mown to within an inch of its life. Now, there's no playground as far as I can tell on this playing field, but there is one that's just across the road over here. So we'll pass this next and we'll head back towards the centre of Old. After walking down Faxton End, we're now at the War Memorial, where it meets Harrington Road. Plans for a memorial in Old began soon after 1914, when the parish sought a place to honour those lost in the war. It takes the form of a tall stone cross set on a square plinth. The base carries carved name panels, and the cross shaft rises in a simple taper to the head. Railings mark the edge of the site, giving a small frame around the stone. The stone for this was taken from a local quarry, and the names on it were drawn from the parish roll. The memorial was raised in the early 1920s. After 1939, more names were added to it to mark later loss in World War II. Walking down Hannington Road, you'll spot a big house on the left next. That's the rectory. It began with an earlier house noted in the late 17th century, but the present building dates mainly from the mid-18th century, when a larger plan was set out in Lias stone and ashlar. In 1985, the building was listed Grade 2, marking its age and detail. Today, it's not a rectory anymore, it's a private house. The exterior is kept in good order, and the interior still holds early stone parts. The staircase has a stained glass window that dates from the early 19th century. The grounds include a lawn and old trees, and is sometimes used for heritage study visits, but it's not open for public tours otherwise. This is Townsend Close, which is named after the family of the same name. On it we have a community centre. This has its roots in a gift made by John Townsend in 1668, when land was set aside for the aid of the poor residents here in Old. Now, you wouldn't initially think a place that looks this modern has ties to something that started in the mid-1600s, now would you? Well, it does, and here's how. Over the years, the charity estate grew, and in the 1970s, land it owned in Northampton was sold. The funds from that sale made it possible to build this present centre and a set of linked almshouse bungalows. The centre stands at 5 Townsend Close beside those bungalows. It has a lounge with soft seats, a fitted kitchen for hot meals, and a main room used for group work. Okay, got a couple of things to show you just at the end of Townsend Close. There are 4 notice boards here. One's for the parish council, one's for the charities, one's for the church, and one's for the village hall. I think the best one to leave a card on is this one, because I've got a pin here which I can just push into that, and there we go, that is a card left. In front of these we've got a bus stop, a post box, and a phone box. I don't think there's anything in the phone box, I think it's empty. Yeah, it's an empty shell. Let's have a quick look at the bus stop. So you can get the number 10 here, which goes to Kettering. There's the bus shelter. There's a food bank box in this, just there, look. And then you come this way, come with me. You're heading back towards the centre of the village again, where there's that big tree you saw earlier. And you can also see here there's a village sign. Now, on the sign is the name of the village, as you would expect, but it doesn't say Old, it says, as you can see, Wold, the old name for the place. On the way out of the village, there's a residential area which we'll drive around to finish. This is Cherry Hill, which took shape in the late 1990s. Now, as far as I can tell, nothing stood here before these houses, which makes it a bit odd that it is where it is. The first homes sold in the early 2000s. Through the 2010s, the area grew further, with new builds added and larger plots gaining value as demand increased. Homes here are a mix of detached and semi-detached houses with brick and stone fronts. The street is a neat circuit, one way in and one way out. And that's the shape of Old, everyone. It begins with its oldest sites, the 13th century church with its tower and its long line of stonework, the 17th century school funded by Jane Leeson, the early chapel, and the later rectory on Harrington Road. Each place rose at a different time, yet they sit within a short walk of one another, forming a chain of buildings that mark how Old grew. As time moved on, new places filled the gaps between these older stones, like the Townsend Close Centre that took shape from a gift some 300 years prior. Across all of this, Old presents itself today as a mixed bag. It's definitely not new, it's an ancient place, but you wouldn't initially know how old it was unless you walked around it. Is this as old as the name suggests? Well, yes and no. It's just a matter of how you define the term.
You call this place old, like it's worn by the rain, but I see strong stone that will always remain. You point at the field, saying times had its say, but the ridge and furrow still guides every day. You look at the map, thinking nothing is new, but the past holds firm in the paths we walk through. You call it old now, like its tale has been told, but it's ancient in ways that run deeper than gold. You say it's old, like the years made it fade. It's ancient with roots that no age ever swayed. Is this old? No, it's ancient where the church tower stands. Surely this is old. No, it's ancient with carved stones in the land. Are you sure? I'm telling you it's old. Wrong, it was Walder in the olden days. You call it old now as we pass by the gates, but the manor once shaped how the fields would relate. You point at the houses, saying time made them slow, but their timber and stone still carry a glow. You call it old now, like its tale has been spun, but it's ancient with names that can't be shunned. You say it's old, like the past has grown cold. It's ancient with marks that no season can hold. You say it's old, like the years made it fade. It's ancient with roots that no age ever swayed. Is this old? No, it's ancient where the church tower stands. Surely this is old. No, it's ancient with carved stones in the land. Are you sure it's not old? No, it's ancient, so the Doomsday Book says. I'm telling you it's old. Wrong, it was Walder in the olden days. As we walk by the hall, but names in the registers answer an ancient call. You point at the farm, saying time wears them thin, but their walls hold tales of the lives lived within. You call it old now, like like its tale has been told, but it's ancient with the Woodford and Townsend of old. You say it's old like its past can't be traced. It's ancient with steps that the years never erased. You say it's old like the years made it fade. It's ancient with roots that no age ever sways. Is this old? No, it's ancient where the church tower stands. Surely this is old. No, it's ancient with carved stones in the land. Are you sure it's not old? No, it's ancient, so the Doomsday Book says. I'm telling you it's old. Wrong, it was Walder in the olden days.
Someone is always listening. That's the message that's on this bench you can find at the beginning here of this episode. Welcome back to West Northamptonshire again, everybody. I think this bench is something to do with the Samaritans, you see. They're mentioned there, look. Samaritans number at the top. Well, this is a nice place to start this episode. This bench is opposite the local school here, which is just there. And in the distance you can see the church, which we'll be walking up to in a bit as well. There's all sorts of things to take in this episode. In fact, this one's even got a little legend attached to it of a believe it or not, a walrus. A walrus, can you believe that, in the middle of Northamptonshire? Well, I don't know whether it's true or not, but we're soon going to find out. This is the parish of Walgrave. Walgrave, Walder's Grove. Isn't it nice when places link to each other? Yesterday we saw the village of Old, and we learned there how it used to be called Walder back in Doomsday times. Well, here we have the next village over, Walgrave, which literally means Walder's Grove. Walgrave is about 9 miles away from Northampton. It has under 1,000 residents and feels very much like a classic Midlands village, with a church, a pub, a school and some farms gathered all around it. Medieval spellings include Woldgrave, Woldegravia and Walgrava. Walgrave has lots of earthworks around it, including ridge and furrow and medieval house platforms. Those remains, now a scheduled monument, tell us that there was once a much larger settlement here that spread out from the church and a manorial centre. In the Doomsday Book, this had around 51 people. The book also records a manor, ploughlands and some meadow. A church is also mentioned. The manor of Walgrave later developed into an important local seat. Walgrave Hall, dating from the 13th century, later gained a fine 17th century staircase and a plaster coat of arms for the Langham family who held the estate. The moated manorial site known as Northall nearby underlines the status of lordship here in medieval times. Now, you could easily argue Walgrave Hall to be the standout landmark in this place, but there's a case to be made for the parish church of St Peter, thanks to its tall sandstone spire which stands atop its 13th century tower. Inside it has a monument to Montague Lane, who died in 1670. Walgrave also has a former rectory of 1687, an 18th century Baptist chapel on a rise above the church, and lots of surviving workers' cottages such as Klondike and New Row. Where did they work then? At a boot and shoe factory, Walker's Works of 1899, later used by the Regent Belt Company. Walgrave had other occupations. Over the centuries, Walgrave has been home to farmers and labourers, as well as clerics and landowners like the Langham family of Walgrave Hall. In more recent times, it supported one of Northamptonshire's oldest football teams. Folklore here brings us the tale of a creature. Local talk, even today, still mentions a curious tale when a walrus was said to be living in one of the nearby creeks. It's never actually been caught, but it's often spoken about. So that's Walgrave in a nutshell, but as you can imagine, there's a lot more to it than that. We'll be sure to cover the earthworks, the handsome spired church, the chapel, the boot factory and the school here, but let's see what else we can find. Let's get this walk started at Walgrave Primary School on Kettering Road. This is a small village school with early classes taught to mixed ages in a single room. Over time, it gained an extra classroom wing, and a playing field was added behind the school during the 20th century. The school later became a maintained primary under the county authority, with a set catchment for Walgrave and nearby villages, and an admissions number of 24 pupils in each year. The school takes children aged 4 to 11, with around 132 pupils on roll. Now, Ofsted definitely liked this place. An inspection in 2004 was followed by another in 2007, which judged the school satisfactory. A further inspection judged it good, as did the one in 2016, and the one in 2019, and the one in 2024. See, they just can't stay away, can they? Just over the road from the school, you see this house here on the end. This one. That is an old police station, and it's still got a stone set above its door lintel that says Northamptonshire County Police. So, there, if you didn't know, that's the old cop shop. Now, we've got a long walk to the next thing, through some residential bits and bobs. We're heading for, I believe, the War Memorial next. Plans for a war memorial in Walgrave began soon after the end of World War I, when a site near this road junction was chosen. This memorial is built of limestone. Its stone base was set in place in 1920, and the main pillar was raised during the summer of 1921. The names of the fallen were carved by a local mason, and the unveiling drew a large turnout. After the Second World War, later names were added to keep the record complete. Today, wreaths are placed each November during the morning service. The local school visits for talks on remembrance, and visitors often stop to read the names and dates. Small repairs are made when needed, whilst ongoing care keeps the memorial in good condition. It's ideally placed here, right in the middle of Walgrave. Okay, the next thing to go for is the church, which is literally only just around that corner. But I'm not going to take you that way. I'm going to take you this way instead, because there's a lot of Walgrave which is to the south of that church. And if I don't get this in the video, people will complain. Now we come to St Peter's Church. Built of lias and ashlar limestone, the church has an aisled nave, a south transept and a chancel. It grew in stages. The tower rose in the late 13th century and the main nave was rebuilt during the 14th century. The chancel windows later gained rich stone tracery and a sandstone spire was set above the tower. Further work strengthened the nave roof and arcades. If you look closely here, there's an inscription on the north parapet that records the date 1633. The west front holds a tall, two-light window, and the brooch spire has some small lucans. Inside, there's a monument to Montague Lane from 1670. In 1954, the building gained Grade 1 listed status. East of the church is the rectory, which was built in 1687. Okay, our next job is to go up Gold Street, which is the street you can see on the right-hand side of Shot there. On the left-hand side of Shot, you can see there's a house. Now that has a nameplate just there that says the Robin Hood. I reckon that used to be a pub with that name. It's very likely. That was a very common name for pubs at one time. Not many of them left now. Phone lines first reached Walgrave in the 1920s when early work was carried out in a small room that held a manual switchboard. Trained operators handled calls for Walgrave and nearby villages, passing each call through by hand. Nowadays, there's no such place. A new exchange, this building, came along in the middle of the century, and with it came a more reliable service. Later upgrades brought an automatic system, and the old switchboard was removed once full automation took place. The exchange gained a stronger power supply in the 1970s and cable routes were expanded towards Kettering Road to support new lines. Today, the exchange supports broadband for homes across Walgrave. The site remains active each day, keeping phone and data links running for the entire village. Next to the exchange is a chapel. A Baptist fellowship in Walgrave was active before 1700, meeting together before a permanent home was built. In 1786, this chapel rose on Gold Street, formed in local brown limestone. Early worship took place in a simple room with pews set to face the pulpit. 2 yew trees were planted beside the entrance gate. In 1899, a brick Sunday school was added at the rear, and the former graveyard was later turned into a garden area. That garden area is now used for outdoor gatherings because this is still very much active. Inside, the space is used for worship and meetings, helped by a small kitchen. During the 20th century, repairs renewed the roof and the windows, and in 1985, the chapel gained a Grade 2 listing. Now, this next corner is like a central point for us here in Walgrave. We'll be back to this point again in the not too distant future. On it, you can see we have this big building. Now, this is some sort of old school. There's a nameplate there that says old school, and this is even marked on the old maps as an old school. Now, there is a board there, some kind of plaque, which tells us what it is, but I don't know whether I can read it because it's kind of behind this bit of greenery here. I think it says Walgrave and Hannington National School, erected 1828, I think that's what it says. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, it's an old school. Now, our next job is to take a left turn here. We see we've got a network of footpaths. We've got 3 of them. We've got one off to the left, one off to the right, and one in the middle. We're taking the one to the left. This will take us to the old shoe factory. After walking down a footpath, we've arrived at Walgrave's biggest piece of industrial history. This was Walker's Boot and Shoe Factory. It began small work in the early 1800s, first using sheds near the ponds on the edge of Walgrave. As demand for its products grew, a larger workshop opened where local men made strong farm boots for nearby fields. In the late Victorian years, the main factory building rose, with long rooms and tall windows that gave bright light for careful work. Steam power drove the early cutting tools, and rows of sewing tables filled the upper floor. The smell of leather spread through the building, and workers spoke of a loud clatter that carried across the village each and every day. Output grew fast during the early war years, and new machines were added to keep pace with orders. Work later slowed as trade changed, and the factory eventually closed in the late 20th century. For a time, the building stood empty, but now it's been turned into a set of neat, modern flats. Okay, now we've made our way north to the village hall. Plans for a village hall in Walgrave were first discussed in the early 1900s, and the original building on Newland Road opened in 1925. During World War II, that hall was used for gathering and talks. After the war, repairs were made to the roof and the doors, and a kitchen was added. A stage was later installed for plays and concerts, and the brick walls were strengthened after inspections. In the late 1990s, a new heating system was fitted. So all of that today gives us this, a main hall which has a tall timber roof frame with windows set high along both side walls. An entrance porch leads into a bright space, and a rear room is used for smaller meetings. Local groups hire this on the regular. The recreation ground here in Walgrave is right next to that village hall. It began in the early 1900s when land was purposely set aside for local sport. A pitch was marked out soon after the purchase of this ground, and early games like football and cricket were then played by village teams. Now, speaking of football, Walgrave once had one of Northamptonshire's oldest football teams. Formed in 1896, the club played in the Northamptonshire League, the Kettering and District Combination League, and more recently the Northants Central Combination League. In the last years of the 20th century, the club was forced to fold and played for a while under the name Walgrave Royal Oak. The club's original nickname, the Pipe Stems, has only recently been unearthed. Now, there is still a team that represents Walgrave, but they don't play here. They're called Walgrave Amber, and they now play home games up the road in Morsley because the facilities at the Walgrave playing field are no longer up to standard. Today, this ground is used for weekend sports sessions, and an annual fete takes place on the main field. You'll often find children here using the play area after school. Now, our next area can be reached from here using a makeshift footpath. We're off to find a moated site. This moated site on the other side of the playing field is one of the oldest features in Walgrave. It dates back to the medieval period, when a small homestead stood on a raised platform here. Any early buildings were made of timber, set within a neat enclosure shaped by banks and a deep moat. Access was gained by a simple timber bridge. Later owners rebuilt parts of the inner yard, adding stone footings to strengthen the layout. Over time, the moat edges were repaired through farm use, and the earthworks kept their shape even as the land around them changed. Today, trees now grow along the outer line, but the square platform can still be identified. After long wet spells, the moat still catches water. Local groups sometimes visit this for guided history walks that start from the village hall. Overall, the earthworks are in a very good condition. Well, my long-time viewers know that if I come across something like this, I'm all over it like a cheap suit or a bad rash or whatever the saying is. You can see how well defined this is. Look, you've got a dip on this side, a dip on this side, and a central island there. This is definitely one of the best moated sites I've ever found, and certainly the best one I've found in Northamptonshire up to now. All over this. Absolutely love it. The unexpected highlight so far, I think. After crossing the moat, we find ourselves on Zion Hill. This road takes its name from the old Zion Chapel in Walgrave, which grew from a small fellowship active by 1820. Early meetings took place in a cottage before the present chapel was built in 1846. Visiting lay preachers led worship, and the chapel was formed in a simple rectangular plan. It was built with local brick, and Sunday school classes were held here for many years. It's not in use anymore. Attendance fell during later decades, and the building eventually closed for worship. At the top of Zion Hill, there are two things to note, but they're actually connected to each other. This here is the Skittles Community Shop, which was set up in 2022 in a former outbuilding of the local pub, the Royal Oak. This is the only shop in Walgrave. In fact, it's the only shop in any of the villages we've so far seen this week. This is why it's so important to the area. It opened after 7 weeks of work by local volunteers and parish councillors. Now, the shop was created because residents felt cut off during the COVID period and wanted a place to offer daily supplies. Chris Heaton-Harris, the local MP at the time, opened this shop, and around 60 people came to its inauguration, despite it being a rainy day. And so this is the Royal Oak, which has long been part of village life in Walgrave, with its name appearing in older notes about the area. An early alehouse stood here long before the present layout took shape. Farm workers and local traders used it for food and drink. I would also imagine workers from the boot and shoe factory also made good use of this. The building itself grew in stages, with stone walls first and later brickwork added as the years passed. By the time the village expanded in the last century, the Royal Oak was a major local institution. Today, the Royal Oak runs with a clear focus on fresh produce. Fish comes from the Stickleback Fish Company, its meat comes from Aubrey Allen, and its fruit and veg from White's Nurseries. Any herbs used in its cooking are taken from a small garden behind the pub. And now for the long walk back to the school where this route started. Now, we have one more thing still to cover here in Walgrave, and that would be Walgrave Hall, but that's not in the village itself, that's to the south of the village, so I'll be driving down to that in a moment. Otherwise, we have the tale of the Walgrave Walrus to discuss as well, don't we? Well, that's going to be covered as well before we end this episode. Been a beautiful village, this. Absolutely fantastic, and the moated site for me was just the icing on the cake. Away to the south and east of the village is Walgrave Hall. This stands on ground once used for the medieval manor of the village. The early site included fish ponds, which still mark the link with that first phase. Control of this passed through the Walgrave family and then the Lane family before the estate was sold in 1655 to John Langham. The Langham family shaped the place for the next 200 years, building a new hall and laying out its gardens in the 1670s. A plaster coat of arms dated 1674 still survives inside, along with a staircase made in around 1630 that was kept when the new work took place. Old drawings show that the hall was once far larger, with a tall tower on the left and a long wing stretching northwest. Only a fragment of that remains today. The limestone walls, the slate roof, and the forward cross wing give a sense of the former scale, even though later changes altered the left side and removed the tower. In the modern period, the building became a farmhouse. It's now a private home and holds a Grade 2 listing for its historic value. The mix of early work and later loss makes it one of the most interesting sites in all of Walgrave. Right, so we've seen the village now, but what about the tale of the Walgrave Walrus? Well, this is a piece of local folklore that first appeared in late medieval notes from the village. Those early lines spoke of a large pale beast seen near a set of ponds. Farmers later added that odd marks were found in soft ground, and one child even claimed to have seen a tusk shape at dusk. As the years passed, the tale placed the creature near the old brook, and it moved, so they say, with a sort of slow grace through the water. Some said its skin shone in the moonlight, others spoke of a deep rumble that rolled across the fields on still nights. A few tales linked the creature with lost cattle or fallen trees, though nothing was ever proved. Victorian writers added grander touches, but I can imagine there was a lot of fabrication in those days. A local teacher even drew a rough sketch that still survives in a small folder of village notes kept by Walgrave Parish Council today. Today, walkers still mention odd sounds, and a few claim to see pale shapes at dusk light. Did the walrus exist, or was it something else? Well, I guess we'll never know.
Down by the works where the stitching runs neat, I heard a tale drifting over the heat. They say a walrus lurks near the peat, splashing its flippers with a rhythmic beat.
You're talking wild, mate, that's quite a feat.
No beast like that would wander these streets. Still I've heard murmurs from walkers fleet, something large moving where the waters meet. Maybe it's real in the reeds at night, gliding in shadows just out of sight. Walgrave walrus, bold and free, drifting along by the old oak tree. Workers watching, how can this be? A Creek-born legend for you and me. I swear I saw it at break last week.
A whiskered shape with a call so bleak.
It bobbed and rolled with a gentle streak,
Then dipped away with a playful tweak.
Well, if it's true,
That's quite unique.
a northern beast,
On a Midlands creek,
maybe it's come for a little mystique.
giving our shifts a tail antique.
Maybe it waits where the waters bend, watching the fields as the hours blend. Walgrave walrus, bold and free,
Drifting along by the old oak tree.
workers watching, how can this be? A Creek-born legend for you and me.
Goo 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 glah,
In the mud it sways,
goo 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 glah,
in a dreamy haze.
goo 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 glah.
In the mud it sways, a walrus wandering this Midland way. Walgrave walrus, bold and free,
Drifting along by the old oak tree.
workers laughing, how can this be? A Creek-born legend for you and me. Walgrave walrus, bold and free,
Rolling along like it owns the sea.
bootstrap voices in harmony, keeping its myth alive with glee.
Hello folks, welcome back to West Northamptonshire again for another episode. I've lost the hat for this one because it's starting to get quite warm. I might be losing this jacket as well by the time this day is over. Now, I'm beginning this one outside a church, which is nothing out of the ordinary. Now, take a look at this church and you might notice something very unusual. Well, two things actually. The first thing is how sort of narrow that tower is, but the tower, to be fair, is the least of the interesting things here. The other thing that you should notice is how wide that nave is. You can see how big it is. Look, it stretches for quite a long way on either side of that tower, and there's a reason for that. That is because you're looking at a very rare type of church. It's one that's got a double nave, and there's a reason for that, as we'll learn. Hopefully when we get inside it, you'll see why it's got a double nave. This is the parish of Hannington. Hannington, Hannah's settlement. Today in West Northamptonshire we come to Hannington, a small village which lies close to Pittsford Reservoir. With a population of between 200 and 300, it feels small and quiet, a place of lanes, hedges and long views. The name Hannington comes from Old English and is usually taken to mean the farm or settlement associated with a man called Hannah. It suggests an early owner or leader whose name has lasted far longer than any building standing today. People have been here far longer than the present village. Bronze Age worked flints have been found in several spots, and Roman pottery marks a small settlement just north of today's houses. East of the church, earthworks record a medieval cluster of paddocks and plots. Hannington appears in the Domesday Book as a modest place in the Allingbury Hundred, with only 7 households recorded. Land was divided between Count Robert of Mortain and Countess Judith, with villagers, smallholders and freemen working ploughland and meadows. Later centuries brought medieval lords holding the estate under tenants-in-chief, and over time the property became subdivided between different landowners. By the 19th century, gazetteers describe a small agricultural patch and a rectory linked to Walgrave. And on that religious note, that's what Hannington's main feature is. The place is best known for the Church of St Peter and St Paul, a Grade 1 listed building of the late 13th century with a rare bisected nave. Hannington has lots of stone cottages, a small former nonconformist chapel of the 1860s, and fields where ridge and furrow from open field farming can still be traced. A brook runs through the parish towards Pittsford Reservoir, and speaking of water, there's a fishing lake to the north. Among those linked with Hannington is Bishop Francis Godwin. He was once a rector here, but he was better known for his writings and later career. Otherwise, people records here stretch back to the 16th century, capturing generations of farmers, labourers and clergy. In terms of tales, one long-told story has Thomas Becket staying here in flight from the king, guided by Gilbertine canons connected with the church's medieval patrons. Wartime memories also linger of bombs falling on Red House Lane during the Second World War. Hannington therefore brings together deep time and everyday life from Bronze Age flints to World War II. I'm looking forward to walking around this one, mainly so that I can see that unique bisected nave in the church. It'll be fun to see what else is in this compact, quiet setting. Okay, so a little precursor to what's coming up in this episode before we start. Hannington is basically one street with a couple of offshoots. It's not very big and it doesn't have a lot to speak of. We've seen countless villages like this before, but every time we have, I've always found something cool. However, here it's different. I've not been able to source much for this one at all, save for a bit of good info on the church and on the village hall. So for the most part in this one, it'll be more about what you can see rather than what I can tell you. Not every place has a lot to talk about. That said, here's something you might be interested in. Main Street once curved sharply at this point where it meets Bridle Road. As you can imagine, it was very dangerous. It has since been straightened out, and there's now a small green which was created after diverting the road. After the green, we have this little area where a chapel began to take shape in 1864. It was planned by a small group for worship and work moved fast. By 1865, the chapel stood on a modest plot here near the main street. Early meetings took place twice each week, and the simple front set the tone for the years that followed. Timber seats were added soon after the first gatherings, and a small stove near the front wall helped warm the room. Over time, the numbers fell, and the chapel closed after a long period of slow use. Once worship ended, the building served as the village undertakers, and later was converted into a garage and a workshop in 1972. Now, we've got two options here after passing the site of the old chapel. We can either go straight to the church, or we can do what I'm going to do, and that is take a footpath off to the right, which is somewhere close to that phone box. So it's over here somewhere. And what it does is it sort of takes you around in a loop and brings you back down School Lane and to the village hall. So that's the next thing we'll go for. When we've been to that, we'll then head for the church, which you can see on the horizon. Now, an important name to Hannington is Downs. By the mid-19th century, the church had fallen into a serious state of disrepair and was little more than a ruin, but thankfully in 1869 the building was restored to its former glory and a new rectory was built alongside it. The person responsible for that was the rector, John Downs, perhaps one of the village's most notable past residents. A graduate of Cambridge University, he studied botany with Professor Henshaw alongside Charles Darwin. He personally paid for the restoration and for the building of the rectory, which is now called Hannington House. It was John Downes' wife Lucy who founded this school in Hannington in 1871. It's now the village hall. A portrait of Lucy Downes hangs in the building to this day, having been donated by the family in the 1970s. There's a memorial to John Downes, his wife and his daughter in the church in the form of a stained glass window in the east wall. As a school, this stayed in use until it closed in 1931 and the building passed into private ownership. It was handed over to the village by the way of a trust in 1964 for their use as a social and leisure centre. It remains that way today. In the past, there were two public houses in Hannington. One was called the Red House, but that was at the very edge of the parish and it's now derelict. The other was here. It was called the Millstone and was used by generations of farmers and villagers. It once had a popular skittles room and was the major social amenity in the village until its closure in 1938. Residents of Walgrave also visited this pub regularly. Now a private home, this used to be thatched, but it lost that in the 1960s. There was a dovecote in the back garden once too. If you turn right at the end of School Lane, you reach Turner's Farm Close. There used to be a farm here with that name, which included a large farmhouse. It was the last thatched house in the village until this street was erected. Now, Turner's Farm Close includes two thatched buildings of its own. Just after that street, we have a pocket park established in 1996. This is a wooded area of around 1/3 of an acre, and a variety of flora and fauna can be found here at different times of the year. On the subject of natural stuff, there's a brook that runs through the parish which feeds Pitsford Water. The Church of St Peter and St Paul in Hannington is by far its crowning gem. The church stands on raised ground in the middle of the village, and in all probability this today looks virtually the same as it did 700 years ago. This church is almost unique in Britain, with two massive pillars in the centre of the nave supporting well-proportioned high arcades. This unusual arrangement of a double nave is rather peculiar, but there's a good reason for it. In the middle of the 13th century, the parish was in the care of the Gilbertine Monastery at Sempringham in Lincolnshire. We know all about that already, don't we? This huge priory church was used by both its nuns and its monks, and they had to be separated during worship. The first rector of Hannington is believed to have been a Gilbertine canon, and Sempringham had the authority to appoint its priests for a long time. As for the building itself, the main church was raised in the late 13th century, built of lias stone with tile roofs. The chancel has a 3-light east window, and the west tower rises in 3 stages. Medieval fittings remain, including a piscina by the altar and a holy water stoop near the south door, along with a perpendicular vestry screen and a pulpit. In 1954, this church gained Grade 1 listed status. Now, we've been in countless churches on TVI, haven't we? And normally it's the chancel that's got all the interesting stuff. But here in Hannington, that's not the case. There's very little in here, save for a very nice east window and the altar. The walls are a bit bare. But to be fair, it's the nave that's the sort of main event here, if you like. You can see these columns in the middle. These would have divided the 2 naves, one on the left, one on the right, one for the monks, one for the nuns. I wonder which side was which. I have no way of telling, and I don't know whether historians have any way of knowing, to be perfectly honest. But there we go. So, that is the inside of the church here in Hannington. Now, there is a visitor's book here. There usually is in churches. And I've decided that's the best place to leave a card today, because there is a parish notice board just outside the church, but it's one of those awful boards that you can't really open or leave a card properly in. So I'll leave one here, and that's probably going to be the best plan of action, I think. So we'll just leave it just there, and everybody can see that I've been to this church and been to this village. Lovely. Fabulous church, by the way. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's head back out and head for the hills. We are pretty much done with this village now. On to the next one. So given what we've learned about Hannington and its incredible double-nave church, let's tell the tale of Thomas Becket as we leave the place behind. When he fled from the king and the general council in 1164, he was supposedly accompanied by Gilbertine canons. Some scholars reckon he stayed overnight in Hannington. Now, there is no documentary evidence to support either belief, but it's believed that Becket left St Andrew's Priory in Northampton in the evening and was in Lincoln the following day. So he must have stayed somewhere. Northampton to Lincoln is easy in a modern car, but back then it was quite a trek. So to play us out today, here's a song that captures the Archbishop's journey, seen from the eyes of one of those Gilbertine canons. See you tomorrow.
By fields where old flints gleam, past plots once shaped by a Roman dream. The church stood firm on its lifted ground, a place where safety and trust were found. We led our guests through dusk's soft veil, past stone-built homes and the fishing trail. The tower watched o'er with steady sight, guarding our path through the fading light. In Hannington's fold we kept him near, shielding his steps while danger drew near. Saint Peter and Paul, your arches guide, your bisected nave, stand strong with pride. We carried our charge beneath your gaze, safe in your walls through troubled days. Bronze age shards in the turf still lie, marking lies long gone beneath this sky. Domesday road of a modest place, 7 homes set out in measured space. 2 great lords held the fields in trust, plows cut deep through the fertile crust. Free men worked where the meadows spread, keeping the land with skill and bread. We walked those bounds with careful tread, guarding the man all England sought dead. Saint Peter and Paul, your arches guide, your bisected nave, stand strong with pride. We carried our charge beneath your gaze, safe in your walls through troubled days. Hey! Old man has passed through many a name, yet fields stay true in their ancient frame. Ridge and furrow still mark the ground, lines of labor long renowned. A chapel stands where prayers once rose, by cottages built in warm stone rows. Tales speak soft of a guest in fear, sheltered by us when foes drew near. Through Hannington's dusk we led him on, keeping our vow till danger was gone. Saint Peter and Paul, your arches guide, your bisected nave, stand strong with pride. We carried our charge beneath your gaze, safe in your walls through troubled days.
Hello folks, welcome back to West Northamptonshire for the last time this week. Now, do you remember on Monday we mentioned Pitsford Water, the big reservoir that we are working our way towards? Well, we are going to see that reservoir in this episode, but not before we've explored this lovely little Northants village. This is the lovely village and parish of Holcot. Holcot, cottages in the hollows. Lastly this week we have the parish of Holcot, 6 miles north of Northampton and once again close to Pitsford Water on the eastern side of the reservoir. With 438 residents recorded in 2011 and lanes that run down towards the water, this is a place of fields and big skies. The name Holcot comes from Old English and is usually taken to mean cottages in the hollows, a nod to the shallow valleys once cut by streams here. In the Domesday Book it appears as Holcote, referencing low-lying dwellings tucked into the landscape. Long before the present village, people were active on these slopes. Archaeologists have found a polished flint axe, Iron Age pottery and traces of enclosures on the higher ground, along with Roman coins and rubbish pits near today's houses. Holcot was once a sizable place in the hundred of Morsley, with more than 20 households, ploughland, meadow and 2 mills. Most land was held directly by King William, with another holding under Countess Judith. Later, Holcot developed as a typical Northamptonshire manor village. The manor house on Rectory Lane with a date stone of 1664 stands as a reminder of the post-medieval landowners and their once large estate. Holcot's best feature is undoubtedly the reservoir, but that's on the edge of the village. In the village, you'd say it was St Mary and All Saints Church, mostly 13th and 14th century. It has a west tower, aisles and a chancel, and it's listed Grade 1. A walk around Holcot would also take in a limestone churchyard cross, the former Wesleyan chapel of 1814, and a village pond created from an old sheep wash pit. Beyond the houses, paths lead towards Pitsford Water and its nature reserve, rich in birds and wildflowers. Holcot gave its name to Robert Holcot, a 14th century Dominican theologian and Bible scholar, thought to have been born here. Later centuries brought farmers, shepherds and chapel-goers, with records mentioning a village shepherd, well cleaners and those who worked the surrounding fields. Local tales are quiet rather than dramatic. Stories linger of the old town well on Main Street and the sheep wash pit, now turned into a pond. Around Pitsford Water, birdwatchers speak of rare winter visitors and long peaceful days in the hides. So, Holcot should be considered as a long-lived-in manorial village with a fine church, modest but interesting buildings, links to a medieval scholar and the wide water of Pitsford Reservoir. It's all backed by the beautiful Northamptonshire countryside. Our first port of call in Holcot is the War Memorial. In early 1920, the village held a meeting to decide how to honour those who died in World War I. During that meeting, a local lady called Mrs. Daniels offered to pay for a new cross, and her offer shaped what followed. Pullens of Northampton were asked to design it, and this is the result. The memorial was ready by July 1920 when it was unveiled before a large crowd. It was placed here at the road junction where Back Lane meets Moulton Road. The cross was made in a medieval style and rises to around 4 metres tall. It stands on an octagonal base of Derbyshire stone. Slate panels were set into the plinth, and the first names placed on them were those who died in the war. A later name from World War II was then added in the same style. Over time, a pebble surround and a road island were added to protect it. In 1985, the memorial was given a Grade 2 listing status, which covers the cross and the plinth, but not the later curb. Today, the site is still well kept, and the names remain easy to read. Walking up Back Lane, next we come to Holcot Village Hall. This began life as the village school in the late Victorian years. It served pupils for a long time until the school closed in the mid-20th century. So one assumes that this playing field, I suppose you'd call it, was part of the school's grounds, because if you look out the front, you can see got a wall there which is very old, and then obviously the village hall which is newer, and then this whole space here would have been connected to the school. So one would assume this was either a field or maybe a playground or something. Maybe it's been extended as well, because I wouldn't have thought a small Victorian school would have had all of this space available to it. They didn't build them that big in those days. On Sywell Road now, we come to the Holcot Duck Pond. This first appears on early 19th century maps when it served as a water source for livestock. At that time, village carts also stopped here to fill barrels. Locals carried out cleaning work in those early years to keep the water usable. As time moved on, a stone edge was added to help hold the bank in place. A drain channel was cut towards the roadside, and willow trees were planted beside the water. Ducks were already noted in these times, but they've stayed ever since. Later, a small rail was placed at the road edge to guide walkers and protect the bank. The depth still changes through the seasons, just as it always has. Today, the water is tested after heavy rain because there's always a flood risk present with landmarks like this. Now, this is definitely a busy little village, is Holcot, because it lies on a crossroads. We sort of came round the crossroads earlier before we went to the War Memorial. You can see here, this is one of the main routes through it. This is the one that goes from east to west, and these cars are all coming from the direction of Pitsford Reservoir, which we'll obviously see at the end of this episode. This next section will take us down to almost the crossroads again. We'll have to find a chapel. Now we've found our way to Main Street, and here we have an old chapel. This was here by the early 19th century when a small nonconformist group set up a place for worship. Early meetings were held in a modest room, and records from that time note a strong attendance. The chapel soon took on a simple brick form with a tall front door facing the lane and 2 long windows lighting the main space. A slate roof was laid in neat rows, giving the building a plain but useful shape. The chapel closed in the mid-20th century as numbers fell. Soon afterwards, the interior was cleared and the building was later sold for a new purpose. That purpose is now a private home. Look closely and you can see where the old front door has been bricked up. St Mary and All Saints Church is the main Anglican building in Holcot, and this has a deep recorded history. A priest is named here in the Domesday Book, so worship was already in place by the late 11th century. The main stone church, though, is later. This was raised in the 13th and 14th centuries, and parish registers begin in 1559. A porch beam dated 1671 still hangs above the entrance today. Later work brought a restoration in 1845, followed by another in 1889. In 1954, the church was listed Grade 1, and later it became part of the Brixworth benefice within the Diocese of Peterborough. The building itself is made of lias stone with ashlar dressings, with lead and slate roofs above an aisled nave and a chancel. Completing it is that lovely west tower. Clerestory windows light the nave, and the tower carries parapets and corner gargoyles. Regular services run through the month. The church is also used for baptisms, weddings and funerals on the regular, and the building is kept in a sound order. It's a great little church, this. That's an interesting little building in front of the church. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think it's church related because that sign says Holy Communion, 9 AM each Sunday. In front of that we have a phone box, which looks like a very well stocked book exchange. Oh yeah, loads in there, look. Let's have a quick look inside it. All sorts of leaflets as well. Cool. Enough to keep people interested, I suppose. And then next to that there's this lovely green. Now, I saw this on the map before I came here, and I knew if the sun was out today this was going to look really good, and I'm pleased to say it does. Let's have a look and see what this stone's all about. I think it's probably some sort of memorial. Yeah, it's the Holcot Millennium Memorial. See, Holcot MM meaning 2000 obviously. And down the bottom here, I don't know whether I can read this because it's a bit faint, but it's all to do with this green, I think, being reserved for public use at the turn of the millennium. I think that's what it says anyway. So yeah, so that's the green. Church behind it, little room next to it, and our next job is to go in this sort of direction because there's a footpath there somewhere over there. It'll take us on to the next street. Holcot has just the one pub these days. That would be the White Swan a bit further up the road. This began as an alehouse in the early 19th century and was already known by its present name by 1930. It served farm workers from nearby fields mostly. Small sales were held here during those early years. Inside, 2 rooms were formed around a central bar and an open fire was placed in the main room. Low beams run across the front room and a small stable once stood in the rear yard. In the 1990s, the pub reopened after a short closure. The kitchen was updated for food service and the garden was improved with new tables. Today, the White Swan serves drinks and offers good food as well. That's enough to entice me in. Okay, last little bit of the village now. Diagonally opposite from the pub you've got Rectory Lane, which is a dead end for cars, but there's a footpath at the end of it. We'll walk down that and it'll take us back to where we began. Then we'll hop in the car and we'll go to Pitsford Water, which is literally just a half a mile or so up the road. I hope you're ready for this, people, because I know full well that Pitsford Water looks really, really good. And with the sun being out as it is right now, it's going to look fantastic. In all senses, Pitsford Water is basically a scaled down version of Rutland Water, and that claim is even more accurate when you consider that it's managed by Anglian Water, just like Rutland Water is. Pitsford gets used for all sorts. It's used for walking, cycling, sailing and fishing mostly. Plans for Pitsford Water began in the 1950s when the local water board looked for a new supply for the north of the county. Some land was purchased soon afterwards, and construction of this started in 1958. The reservoir opened in 1967 and quickly became a key source for the area. Creating the reservoir meant damming the River Nene, although more precisely, engineers blocked one of its upper valley branches. The site was shaped with a long earth bank and a dam near the edge of Brixworth, and a raised causeway was built to divide the main basin. However, before the causeway there was a small bridge. It sat on the line of the old route between Holcot and Brixworth. Once engineers decided to flood the valley, the bridge would have ended up under the new water level, so it could not stay in place. To solve this, they built the causeway on a new alignment. Instead of a short span over a stream, the causeway needed to carry the road across a much wider stretch of water. Engineers built it by piling earth and stone to form a solid bank, then laying the road across the top. Once the causeway opened, the old bridge was removed, and the valley was flooded soon afterwards. Today, the causeway is the only road crossing, and it's one of the most recognisable features of Pitsford Water. Other notable features include a 6-mile track set around the shoreline.
Now, if you want to come and see Pitsford Water for yourself, there is this nice little car park which I've filmed all these shots from. It's normally a pay and display car park, but I've got away with it this morning because the machine's not working. Bonus!
Holcot comes through as a place shaped by long use and steady care. From the early church to the later chapel on Sywell Road, it holds layers of past effort that still sit in its lanes today. The pond, once used for livestock and village carts, is another example of its endurance. Holcot also links outwards, especially towards Pitsford Water. The reservoir brought a long earth bank, a causeway, a sailing club, and a track that runs for miles. Today it's used for walking, cycling and fishing, and of course supplies the locals with council pop. I think the reservoir is the best feature of this one, and it won't be the last time we see it. To play us out, I've composed this lovely little chilled out pop tune which I hope encapsulates the feeling of the reservoir and its calm still waters. I'll be back for more Northants soon. See you later.
By the wide blue sweep where the wildfowl glide, old tracks drift down where the grasses sway, and the water holes light at the break of day. Reeds stand tall in a soft array, farm walls lean where the moss runs deep, and the stillness lies where the willows sleep. Every turn brings sights that sweep by the water's edge where the shadows creep. Holcot breeze by the silver shore, calling us back for more and more. Pitsford water shining wide, holding light along its tide. Holcot standing by its side, bound in past that never hide. Tracks lead out where the walkers roam, old wells sit where the grass is comb, and the chapel stands with its weathered loam, and winds sweep through this rural home. Robert Holcot's name still stays, a scholar's mark on distant days. Farmers work these open ways by the glistening water's soft displays. Holcot breeze by the silver shore, calling us back for more and more. Pitsford water shining wide, holding light along its tide. Holcot standing by its side, bound in past that never hide.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.